Okay, we'd like to invite Debbie Davis up, and we'll start in with our Audit Committee report. And I'll turn the time over to Vice Chair Belknap, or Audit Chair Belknap.
Okay, board members, the recommended action out of audit is that the board releases the ProStart audit report to the public, and that in response to the ProStart audit, the board disallows $139,335.23. In addition, that the board approve at number 1 to withhold future disbursements until issues identified in the audit are resolved, and update the contract to recognize the Utah Restaurant Association Foundation to provide a system and organizational controls report, and stop reimbursing the state of Utah sales tax.
You adding the furthermore part?
Nope, that's, sorry. Furthermore, the committee recommends that USBE employees are trained in internal controls.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor that the board releases the ProStart audit report to the public, and that in response to the ProStart audit, the board disallows $139,335.23. In addition, the board approves, 1, withhold future disbursements until issues identified in the audit are resolved, and 2, update the contract to require the Utah Restaurant Association Foundation to provide a system and organization controls report, and 3, stop reimbursing the state of Utah sales tax. Furthermore, the committee recommends that the USBE employees are trained in internal controls.
Second. Do you need that? We don't need that coming out of committee. Okay.
Any discussion to the motion? Board Member Hanson?
Thank you. Just a question. I wondered if we could get some clarification and maybe information about how we came up with that $140,000 figure out of the total $650 that was mentioned in the report.
Yeah, I want you to know that we can't really talk about the report until the audit is released. So I guess you could divide this and release the audit first, then we can talk about the audit. So that would be up to you.
Motion to divide.
There's a motion on the floor to divide the question. Those in favor?
Oh, you're going to have a
Do I have a
second.
second? Do I have a second? Second, Janet Cannon. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes unanimously.
Oh, it's
So
divided.
now we need to separate the motions, and
To release the ProStart.
we'll take the
audit.
first portion, which is that the board releases the ProStart audit report to the public, and that in response to the ProStart audit,
Nope.
the board
Nope, just
Nope.
right there.
just
Release it to the
releases the
public.
report to the public. Discussion to the motion. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously. So we have a motion on the floor to, well, actually, we've already taken the motion.
No, just to, now the report is now public. Once we voted on it, it's now public,
So
right,
the
Deb?
report is public. Do I have to restate the second half of the motion? I guess I
No,
do.
so we can talk to the second half of it.
Okay. So, CAE Davis.
Okay, I don't need to read.
Okay, so Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis. So to answer your question, what is included in the $139,000 that's included in the motion when we in internal audit questioned $650,000? Essentially, the $139,000, the vast majority of that amount includes unverified expenses, meaning there was a significant portion, over $60,000, where there was just no verification provided that the expense was related to the program. There was another portion that was just over $60,000 that was supported by dummy checks. So again, just not verified. So that's the vast majority. There were a few other smaller items like a duplicate payment where We paid, the Department of Workforce Services paid, that was 139. So some that are just a few hundred or a few thousand, but again, the vast majority of what was included in the disallowed amount that is included in the recommendation is unverified expenses. There was no documentation provided about what the expense was for.
Board Member Hanson?
Yeah, just to follow up then. And so in the report, I think that we questioned a total of about 650,000. This is 140,000 of that. The other question expenses, can you just explain the criteria, I guess, for not including those in the amount that we would ask for back or take back from ProStar?
Absolutely, and this was a discussion had by the audit committee, so if any of the audit committee members want to weigh in on why they voted the way they did based on the expenses that were there, absolutely, please weigh in. And maybe I'll point you to the auditor concluding remarks in the report, or you can go to any of the findings. The auditor concluding remarks do have a table. Let me get to the right page. I might have it sooner. Page 55, that outlines some of the lack of documentation, right? So we had completely unverified expenses. You can see the two amounts that are just over 60,000 that I mentioned. There are some others where there's a concern between who is the contracting entity, and based on who the contracting entity should have been, if it should have been the foundation rather than the association, is the documentation really adequate because the contracting entity is inadequate? And that was quite a significant amount. And then you can see some of those smaller amounts as well. Kevin, is there anything you want to add on some of the other amounts?
So Kevin John, Deputy Audit Executive. Yes, if you look to that table in the auditor concluding remarks, you'll see approximately 100,000 of it was salaries for association employees. That was provided as evidence that it was foundation employees it was funded, but again, all the documentation supports that they were association employees and paid by association or via association bank accounts. And then you notice below that there's another approximately $400,000 that the only documentation to support it, again, was documentation from a separate legal entity, the association, as opposed to the foundation. So for that reason, and as stated earlier in the report, one of the three reasons why we would question a cost is if there isn't adequate documentation. So clearly, a receipt, an invoice, a check, or a credit card from a separate legal entity is not going to be considered adequate documentation that you, the other entity, incurred a cost, right? So we would expect that entity would incur the cost as opposed to a separate entity. So for that reason, yeah, the full 650 was questioned, but again, it's not to say that cost wasn't incurred, it just wasn't incurred by the entity with whom you had contracted.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions. Oh, Chair Huntsman.
Madam Chair, can you ask staff to explain what is meant by in response to the ProStar audit, the board disallows the $139,335.23. What that means, like payback. So.
Is that Vice Chair?
Yes,
Glover?
please.
Yeah, so I will point you to page 7 of the report includes kind of a definition of what is a questioned cost, and then also what is a disallowed cost, because you're right, the recommendation says disallow that amount, not question that amount. So disallowed essentially means this regulatory body is coming back and saying those funds need to be repaid. They were not allowable costs, and so they must be repaid. So that is essentially what you're saying when if you were to approve the motion that we are going to disallow these costs, your management staff would seek repayment.
Thank you. Follow up. Go ahead, Chair
No, that
Huntsman.
just satisfies my request. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, we have a motion on the board that in response to the ProStart audit, the board disallows $139,335.23. In addition, the board approves, 1, to withhold future disbursements until issues identified in the audit are resolved, and 2, update the contract to require the Utah Restaurant Association Foundation to provide a SOC system and organization controls report, and 3, stop reimbursing the state of Utah sales tax. Furthermore, the committee recommends that USBE employees are trained in internal controls. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Chair Belknap?
You get to my next thing. Thank you. The recommended action is that the board considers the process regarding complaints against individual board members. The process regarding complaints against individual board members would be, one, when internal audit receives an allegation on the public education hotline about an individual board member in accordance with R 277-123, and as needed, internal audit will follow up with the complainant to request additional information supporting that allegation. Number two, internal audit will complete a preliminary analysis of the allegation with related supporting information in consideration of Board Bylaws Article 4.12. As number three, as appropriate, internal audit will then refer to board leadership for the preliminary analysis inclusive of the allegation and related supporting information. Number four, that board leadership will review the referred analysis considering the criteria from the bylaws Article 4.12. And number five, if board leadership determines the allegation will move forward, board leadership will, A, provide that individual board member a copy of the allegation with related supporting information, and B, request that individual board member provide a response with applicable supporting evidence. Number six, the information in 5A and 5B will be provided to all board members for discussion in an executive session for a board meeting. Number seven, in response to a discussion in executive session, action may be authorized consistent with Board Bylaws, Article 4.12A through G. Let me see. Let's see. I'm not going to read all those. Okay, I
that
think
the
that
end?
was it.
You win the award for the longest motions of the day. We have a motion on the table as stated. Is there discussion to the motion? Board Member Hanson.
Just wondered if there's a reason that we're adopting it this way as just a motion instead of a policy, or adding it to our other documentation, like bylaws or another place.
May I
Chair?
respond? Actually, this is the audit committee and our audit staff trying to figure out what to do with the hotlines when they come in, rather than just have them fall on the floor. And we've got to do something with it.
Excuse me, can I respond? Yeah. So I understand that we need a process. I'm just wondering why we're adopting it in this format, which is kind of uncontrolled. We don't have a policy that would be updated and tracked that would go with this. It's not identified as anything except a motion to adopt a process.
May I answer?
Please.
Because it has to do with these information coming in through the hotline. Then the bylaws, the policies are for us. Well, the bylaws are for us, okay? And so this is telling our staff what to do if a hotline comes in. What do they do with it? You're going to ask the same question again, aren't you?
Well, yeah. but I get
Because
the
you don't
same
like my
If I ask
answer.
the same question, I'm not sure that we're communicating very well.
That's the definition of insanity.
Board Member Moss.
I think I saw it. Is Debbie?
Oh, go ahead. Please.
Thank you, Debbie.
Sure, absolutely. So Vice Chair Belknap is correct that there is a hotline piece of this, but then there's also the board needs to take action piece. So I think it is a relevant question to say, well then, should this be a policy? Should this be a bylaw? And I believe the motion coming out of Audit Committee was, consider it. Let's make sure everybody's looking at this. How does the board feel about it? And then I think you could either do a friendly amendment or something to say, and let's put it in a board policy or put it in board bylaws. And then there are references to the hotline process and rule that we do have currently.
Are you making that as a friendly amendment, Board Member Hanson?
I will certainly propose it as an amendment. I'm not sure if it's friendly or not. That'll have to be decided on the other side of the
Chair
table.
Belknap, would
I
that
don't
be
find
a
that
friendly
unfriendly.
amendment?
But this is actually not my motion. This belongs to the audit committee.
It is my intent to be friendly in this process.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor to amend that the stated motion be included in board policy. We need a second. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, second, Chair Huntsman. Now, those who are speaking will be speaking on the amendment. Board Member Moss, do you have something on the amendment?
Raise your hand if you have it.
Do you, seeing no further comment, on the amendment? Seeing no further comments, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes unanimously, and we'll go back to Board Member Lear for the original motion that was on the floor.
Right.
As amended.
As amended. My question is, doesn't this all break down if it's an anonymous hotline complaint? Which is possible, probable?
Please, CAE Davis.
Absolutely. Great question, Member Lear. We do deal with anonymous hotlines from time to time. Individuals have that option. So if we received an anonymous hotline from an individual against an individual board member, essentially what our process would be, we would follow through this process. But what you're correct about is we would be limited in the preliminary analysis that we could do to whatever they provided to us. We might not be able to go back and request additional documentation or evidence. We would be limited, and so there could be a higher chance of insufficient data to move anything forward. So that's how we'd handle it. That's how we currently handle hotlines that come in that are anonymous. There's no way to contact the individual. We'll do the best we can with what we're given, but it can be limiting.
And if I can just follow up with a short more comment, it concerns me that a lot of energy is spent on an anonymous tip, hotline response that might or might not have truth to it, might or might not have, is evidentiary. I mean, there's just so many problems with spending a lot of staff time on something that's anonymous. It just troubles me. So just comment.
CAE Davis. Do you have a response?
I don't need a response. I don't.
We are trying to streamline our process as much as possible. And I will say, we're trying to gatekeep a little bit so that, and that's why there is a provision for a preliminary analysis, so that we're not just pushing everything through to board leadership, because you are all very busy as well. And so if we can identify up front, there's insufficient evidence, this does not need to move forward, then we can just stop it right there.
Thank you. Board Member Hutchings.
I would like to propose an amendment.
Okay.
I would like to add, after individual board member in number 1, the words "in their capacity as a board member."
Is that all?
Yeah.
There, do we have a second? Did you get that, Earl? There's an amendment on the floor to add the words "in their capacity as a board member" after the words "individual board member" in number 1. Any discussion to the motion? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say there may be a situation where a board member is also a school employee, where there might be a complaint against, and I would imagine it's the intention that those complaints are handled as would normally be handled if they were not a board employee or a board member.
Yeah. Do we have a response? Is anyone speaking in response to this? Well, let's just keep moving through. But CAE Davis, I'm going to go back to you for a minute. I mean, in a case like that, do we even entertain things like that if it's a mad parent that a teacher gave a bad grade to a student?
No one would dare send in a complaint. No. So
Not
we'll
mentioning names.
We want anyone to be able to feel like they can come to us and bring any concern that they have. That said, we have established a process and a protocol procedures so that we can look at everything and say, yes, and evaluate, is this just somebody who's mad? And that really goes back to, what is the criteria that we're looking at? What is the criteria that has been violated in law, in board rule, in a school policy? That's why many times we refer things, if it's not within the jurisdictional authority of the board, we want to send that back to an LEA. They need to handle that at their level. So there's definitely processes that we have. with the hotline because we want to make sure that everything's handled appropriately. Everything with the hotline, though, really is case by case because things are so different as they come in. Did
Thank
that
you.
Sufficiently.
Board Member Hymas?
Yeah, so you're saying that this addition wouldn't change anything? That the addition to the verbiage is not necessary? Is that what you're saying? You already have that process in place?
So essentially what I'd say to this is a very specific process for board members, individual complaints against a board member acting in their capacity as a board member. The other processes and policies and procedures that we have in place would not be for a board member acting in their capacity as a board member, and those are already established. So those are taken care of. This, I don't see an issue with this. I'm fine with the language being added. I mean, it's more your language than mine, but as a board, just how do you want to handle it? But two kind of separate processes, this one being very specific.
Board Member Hutchings?
Just permission to respond?
Yes.
I'm just looking at this. If there was a complaint, let's just say that there was a hotline complaint against me as a school leader, I would hope that as also a board member, it wouldn't go through this process that we're delineating right now, but it would go through the regular complaint process as any other school employee would.
Yes, that would be the intent, is we will look at who is the person the allegation is against, what is the capacity that they're working in. If it is against, as a teacher in a school, that's that separate process. As a board member, in your capacity as a board member, separate process.
So do you want to keep the amendment? Okay. Board Member Hanson?
Yeah, I'm all for the sentiment of the amendment, but I believe that it belongs in 2 because they do this preliminary analysis and they've got to determine, here's the complaint, is this because she's a board member or he's a board member, or is it because of some other role that she plays in? And then they can channel that, and act on it the way that they want. But if we want to make the amendment, I just think it has to be in 2 where the analysis is taking place, because in 1, how do you know? You just get a complaint and then they have to do some process to figure out how to
Would you
deal with it.
consider that placement change a friendly amendment to the amendment?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Oh, no. Let me read it.
Just
for a minute.
preliminary analysis, including whether, that analysis just includes this, yeah,
There is no analysis
to me.
if it's not against a board member during their.
Board Member, let's go back to Chair Belknap to respond.
I'm sorry, I actually think the amendment probably is better placed under the individual board member working in their capacity, because then internal audit will follow up with the complainant to get supporting documentation. But if it's at a school district, they would send it to the district and not necessarily gather more evidence. Correct, Deb? No?
Sorry, I was typing and I'm listening.
No.
So R277123 includes the potential for a preliminary analysis for any hotline. So
Okay.
including it here in this process is not something new and different from what we would do. And then actually is looking at this as part of number 2. When we complete our preliminary analysis, we're doing it in consideration of board bylaws, which inherently says, because you're a board member acting in your capacity. So maybe that takes care of it.
So are you saying, CAE Davis, you're going to do this whether it's in 1 or 2, or whether it's the words are here at all? You're already going to do this in the beginning of the process?
We will do a preliminary analysis.
Okay.
We do that.
So now then we go back to, do you still want to make the move to put it into?
I was actually not suggesting that it's necessary. I was saying if the board wanted to include it, I think it would be in another place, not in 1. But I don't personally feel that it's necessary. I think we already have the preliminary analysis process
Okay.
in place.
Board Member Hutchings, is that a friendly amendment to put it in 2 before we vote on it?
I think after listening to Vice Chair Belknap, I would agree with keeping it in 1.
Okay, so are you making an amendment to move it to 2? Okay. Board member, I'm sorry, it's hard out of my peripheral. Yes, I should be looking at my list. If only I could be as good as you.
I had a concern.
Chair
and a
Hanson.
question.
Go ahead.
So I'm not sure if the language is necessary because of the processes here, but my concern is as soon as we put that in there, then who really determines whether you're the board member or not? Is that because you got to be in a board meeting, you got to be getting paid? If grumpy grandpa goes, sees grandchild's recital or something in a school and I act like an idiot and do something stupid in that education community, I think I'm a board member 24/7. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, no, I was not I was not on assignment from the board. I wasn't in a committee. I wasn't in this building. So now, Debbie, you can't audit me. I'm just going to the extreme of, I think I like where it was going, but will those words, having that put in there, and I guess it's for our AAGs, is that just limit their capacity now in a big way? Because it's
Go
the way
ahead.
that it's worded. That's my concern.
Yeah, and I'm listening to you, I'm looking here at the bottom of this where the asterisk and then it quotes Article 4, and they're on the second line, or any other conduct which tends to injure the good name of the board. If a board member is caught smoking crack behind the school building, then that would, yeah, it's not part of their duties here, but it would tend to injure the good name of the board. If they're caught doing something out in public with their grandchild being loud and obnoxious, that's unrelated to their duties as a board member, but could that tend to injure the good name of the board? So in thinking like that, it seems like just about anything a board member does outside their actual official duties could trigger this clause here that tends to injure the good name of the board. And I think that's what Chair Huntsman was saying.
Seeing no other, thank you for that clarification. Seeing no other comments.
Except for mine.
Okay, Board Member Earl.
I'm going to disagree with that philosophically, that everything you engage in is somehow reflective of the board, whether it illegally, yes, there is those parameters, but to start saying that anything I'm doing is going to be measured and could be called upon to be, whether you agree with me or not, I think that is so broad, and that is not, I just think that's not really the intent of this, to be honest with you, nor is it I just don't think that's the right way to view this. There's too many things that someone might disagree with me philosophically about that I can still engage in, both in speech and otherwise, that aren't losing it at a program or whatever, but they may still disagree with me, and that doesn't mean that it's in my capacity as a board member, and I can do that. So I think this is not only is this a free speech issue, or it could be, and I think that's why this language is important, but it's not every single thing I do could be marked or measured in some, excuse me, in some capacity.
Thank you. Board Member Moss.
Actually, I'm sorry, we are still on an amendment. Point
We're
of
on the
order.
amendment. Mhm.
I'll withhold, I have another comment.
Okay, seeing no other discussion, those in favor of the amendment say aye. Oh, I did need to repeat. The amendment is to insert the words acting in official capacity, was that? Acting in their capacity as a member of the school board after individual board member. Is that right? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? No. Let's do a quick roll call vote. Those are in favor, raise your hand, please. That would be, sorry, one more time. Board members Booth, Moss, Hart, Earl, Hutchings, and Klein are aye. The motion fails. We have a motion on the floor that, to read the whole thing. Do I have to read the whole thing?
Well, you may, no, see if you have any amendments.
Let's have people speak to the motion, the main motion. Board Member Moss.
Well, potential amendment, but could I ask a point of order? So my concern is with the same that AAG President brought up, which is process for investigating and potentially disciplining very broad, and in fact, in my view, overly broad, at least in this context we're speaking about here, which is precisely that language, any other conduct which tends to injure. So I've had emails telling me that I am a horrible, no good, very bad, what was Alexander's thing?
Very good, very bad day.
Terrible, awful, horrible, no good, very bad board member, correct. And that I have brought shame on the board with my vote on this or that, or my failure to advocate this or that, right? So we all do, right? And that's sort of my point. I understand that if we're going to tie this to a violation of law, policy, or bylaw, that's one thing, but to create a investigative disciplinary process, that seems to me overbroad. So my point of order is, if I wanted to bring an amendment to make this apply only to violation of law, policy, or bylaws and strike that, because that is referring to bylaw language, would that need to be raised as an amendment to the bylaw rather than an amendment to this particular motion?
I would think,
Throw that out there for whoever.
I would think
Because it's
yes.
4 o'clock and.
So it needs to, I'm seeing nods. Let's have CAE Davis and AAG Quisenberry help us to know if that is an amendment that needs to be made to the bylaw referenced here or can be made here.
Yeah, that makes sense as a practical matter if you're discussing the bylaw and amending it, that to put it with the bylaws rather than two different locations relating to the bylaws. So it's not necessarily a legal thing one way or the other. It's more kind of a pragmatic way to place this in a logical place. So yes,
So how can I do that?
Put it on an agenda.
Point of order. All right.
You'd put it on an agenda, right?
Okay.
Request it to be put on an agenda.
Can I make a motion here to place that on the agenda, or does that have to be submitted separately?
You just need to get 3 people and send it.
Okay.
There's a motion on the table, you gotta postpone.
Yeah.
So I would
He
move to
has to
postpone the motion on this pending consideration of a motion to revise the bylaw?
Why, you're saying this couldn't pass if the bylaw wasn't revised? Is that what you're saying? This couldn't pass if the bylaw wasn't revised?
Motion doesn't pass, then nothing happens. Boss is wanting is just have this incorporated into a bylaw. So
Is that what you're saying?
Correct. I guess the motion here
You
would
move
be
to
to
committee to put it in a
postpone
bylaw.
pending consideration of a motion to amend the bylaw. Yeah, we can't vote on the bylaw here, but postpone pending that consideration and submission, right?
to, yeah. So by doing that,
I think.
There's,
it will go into a committee with a bylaw, and it will get put into a further discussion.
so there's a motion on the floor to postpone this motion pending
And
further action.
Pending
That's it,
submission
right?
of a revision to the bylaw in consideration of that motion. Sorry.
There's a motion on the floor to postpone the motion pending further action and moving the, a bylaw revision to leadership.
Yes, perfect.
that works.
Thank you.
That puts it in stall.
Did you write all that? Because I can't remember it to restate
Yeah,
it.
thank you. That captures it. Sorry.
Okay, there, do we have a second? Yeah, that's the same thing. Do we have a second? Board Member Hutchings. Do you have discussion to the motion? Board Member Hanson?
Yeah, I'll just speak against the motion to postpone. I think we can deal with this now, and if we want to update the bylaws, we can update the bylaws. There's a reference in there to the bylaws. It would automatically update. I don't know why we need to deal with them separately and push this down the road potentially, 2 or 3 months.
Board Member Hutchings?
I would be in favor of it because the concern I spoke about with my previous failed amendment would be taken care of if this was in the board bylaws.
We're not moving this to the.
Okay, of any other, Board Member Straight?
Yes, if the consequences for this were great, then I would say that that would be the direction we need to go. But in Congress, they can discipline their own members, but it cannot extend further than removal from office. We don't even have that much authority. So if we go through this whole process, the most we can do, because then it would go to a violation of the bylaws, there's not much we do other than issue a reprimand or something like that. So this does not extend to removal from office. If it led to that, it's going to be up to the legislature. So that's why I'm against it, because we are enforcing our own professional rules, just like any other organization. And we don't even have as much power as what Congress would have or the legislature would have in removing their own members and disciplining them. So I speak against it.
Okay. Board Member Moss, do you have anything else to say?
Quick response. I appreciate both those comments. I think we do have some significant consequences here. And I just feel like to set up a disciplinary process that I understand it's not removal, but it's significant restriction on a board member's ability to act, that it would be appropriate to consider the breadth of the potential violation that might put you into that disciplinary process. And for me, injuring the good name of the board, while I respect the idea that we all want to avoid that, is simply too broad to justify the kind of investigation and disciplinary process. And if we took some time to decide whether we really want it to be that broad, then we could come back and apply the discipline to the violation. I think it's important to get the violation right first, but I appreciate the other perspectives.
Thank you. Chair Huntsman?
Just one more consideration for this, and I appreciate the work that's gone into this, is this isn't adding anything. What this is doing, and I'll just speak from a leadership position, the way the bylaws are put together right now, we in leadership, we're the ones that have to determine. We have we don't have any guidance at all of how we go about dealing with a complaint, and said we get them and then we say, oh, okay, do we want to look at them? And then we look at them through our eye. This is saying we're not. This is saying we have, using good audit principles, a little bit of investigation, get some facts, get some background from who's accusing what, and bring that forward to leadership. So there isn't any additional burden or penalty or anything. It's basically refining our internal process that if there's a complaint, that you're just not trusting board leadership to launch and do their own investigation. That's the one thing that I like about this, is it's like a non-biased, you're following basic investigative audit, but it's more audit approach to what's the substance of this, and is this real or not? And your leadership isn't having to do all of that due diligence by themselves. That is all this is. And I hope I haven't offended anyone with the concern of the board, whether you're in board capacity or not. We have to weigh that anyway in this on our side, the way that the bylaws are placed. This is just an internal procedure that respects, and it says in here, it mentions our bylaws and spells it out. It just puts some procedure and process together that all of us, all 15 of us, know this is how it's going to be, instead of some random thing that leadership gets aggressive one time and not on the other, and we don't do our due diligence. So I appreciate it coming out of committee. It's It's not the end of the world, it's just an internal process that helps me with my expectations as a board, and board leadership, and then also as a board member, that if I get a complaint on me, I know this is a process that's gonna happen, and it all stays internal. It's all, nothing, it goes it goes forward to the, in an executive meeting, and some things get determined from there, so I had to get that out, so I'm just seeing the reality of our situation here.
Thank you. We have 2 more lights, it looks like, and I'm just going to make a friendly note that we're an hour and 40 minutes past schedule at this point. Board Member Lear, I didn't, no, please make your comment. I did not mean for you to turn your light off. I'm just so, for everybody's awareness. Please quickly make your comment.
Molly was first, but
I
two things.
apologize.
I feel like this is an extension of the hotline and is completely appropriate to take care of now. And secondly, I'm sort of troubled that we have these discussions about teachers all the time. And we don't have any problem extending the behavior of teachers to every minute of their day. And I think we are leaders of teachers and should at least in an ethical way. This is not a legal standard, it's an ethical standard. And I think in a legal way, an ethical way, we have at least as much responsibility to be ethical and appropriate as a teacher does.
Thank you. Board Member Hart.
I really want to stand up and say amen and praise and jump around what she said. But I did, and this goes right along with what Chair Huntsman has said. As a member of the Audit Committee, and I don't want to speak for the other members, this was in no way a punishment. This was, or a disciplinary action. This is a set of procedures because all of a sudden, we're getting on the hotline these types of comments, and what do? Where's the transparency in how something like that would be handled? Even though it's handled really behind the scenes, it's not something that goes out to the general public. We don't go renting billboards, but we do need to have a process, and it needs to be transparent to those of us that, that would be responsible for this. And amen. We do this to teachers all day long. We should have no trouble doing it to ourselves.
Thank you. Board Member Moss.
15-second response. I agree completely. I have no objection to this. I think it's an improvement. I think it provides a system that allows leadership to make good decisions. So my motion is not at all in objection to this. It's simply that this furthers a process which can result in significant discipline. And I understand that discipline is already out there. So my only suggestion is that we consider the breadth of what puts you into this process. I have no objection to the process. And my motion is simply to take that piece first. It's the underlying violation, to look at that first, then come back and apply the process for determining discipline. So for what it's worth, amen.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor to postpone the motion and to move the proposed motion to board leadership for approval to place on future board agenda for revision, bylaw revision. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Let's have you raise your hands.
Okay.
Those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Okay, and did you get Board Member Moss and Hart and Earl and Hutchings and Klein? Or aye? Get those? Correct. The motion fails. We have a motion on the board that the board considers the process regarding complaints against individual board members. Process regarding complaints against individual board members One, when an internal audit receives an allegation on the public education hotline about an individual board member in accordance with R277-123, and as needed, internal audit will follow up with the complainant to request additional information supporting the allegation. Number two, internal audit will complete a preliminary analysis of allegation with related supporting information in consideration of board laws, bylaws, Article 4.12. Number three, as appropriate, internal audit will then refer to board leadership for the preliminary analysis inclusive of the allegation and related supporting information. Four, board leadership will review the referred analysis considering the criteria from bylaws Article 4.12. Five, if board leadership determines the allegation will move forward, board leadership will A, provide that individual board member a copy of the allegation with related supporting information, and B, request that individual board members provide a response with applicable supporting evidence. 6, the information in 5A and 5B will be provided to all board members for discussion in an executive session of a board meeting. 7, in response to a discussion in executive session, action may be authorized consistent with board bylaws Article 4.12A-G. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Chair Belknap. That's the end. Let's